White CEO tormented black wife, but after she stunned all as the richest, now it's too late for regrets. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, golden liquid spreading like the tears Jessica had stopped shedding years ago. "You're nothing without me," Richard Blackstone sneered, his perfectly tailored suit pristine while his wife stood drenched in the wine he'd just poured over her head at his own company gala. "A nobody I pulled from obscurity. Remember that." 500 guests pretended not to see. They always pretended not to see. But 6 months later, those same guests would watch Richard Blackstone fall to his knees in that very same ballroom, begging the woman he'd humiliated. By then, Jessica Kennedy Blackstone wouldn't just be the richest person in the room, she'd own the building, the company, and everything Richard had ever claimed as his. This is the story of how a tormented wife became the puppet master pulling every string, and why sometimes the greatest revenge isn't served cold, it's served with a smile and a contract. But before we dive into this incredible story of justice and triumph, if you love stories where the underdog rises to claim everything, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And I have to ask, have you ever witnessed someone underestimate the wrong person? Let me know in the comments below. Jessica Kennedy met Richard Blackstone on a rainy Thursday in San Francisco. She was 24, working 3 jobs to pay for her mother's cancer treatment while finishing her MBA at night. Richard was 35, already CEO of Blackstone Industries, a tech empire he'd inherited from his father but claimed he'd built from scratch. "You have the most fascinating mind," he'd said, watching her solve a complex coding problem at the coffee shop where she worked mornings. She'd been fixing their payment system on her break, not knowing the well-dressed man behind her was worth $2 billion. Their courtship was a whirlwind that every magazine wanted to cover. The handsome CEO and the brilliant nobody, except Jessica was never a nobody. She was the daughter of immigrants who'd sacrificed everything for her education, a woman who spoke 4 languages and could code in 12 programming languages. But Richard liked the narrative of saving her, and young, in love, and desperate to pay for her mother's treatment, Jessica let him tell it. The wedding was perfect. 2,000 guests at the Blackstone estate, her mother finally healthy enough to dance at the reception, and Richard looking at her like she was his entire world. The photos would later haunt her. How genuinely happy she looked, how she couldn't see what was coming. It started small, the way it always does. "That dress makes you look tired, darling. Why don't you wear the blue one I bought?" Then it escalated. "Your friends are lovely, but they're not really our kind of people, are they?" Within a year, Jessica found herself isolated in a massive mansion, her MIT PhD abandoned because Richard said, "Why would my wife need to work?" Her mother, living in the guest house Richard had so generously provided, was the only family she saw regularly. Her old friends stopped calling after too many declined invitations. But the public humiliation, that was Richard's special talent. At charity galas, he'd interrupt her mid-sentence. "Jessica's trying to understand complex business matters. Isn't it adorable?" He'd pat her head like a child while board members chuckled uncomfortably. At family dinners, he'd criticize her cooking, her appearance, her opinions, always with that same patronizing smile. Jessica came from nothing, he'd remind his mother, loud enough for the staff to hear. "We have to be patient while she learns." His mother, Victoria Blackstone, was worse. "Richard saved you," she'd whisper during family gatherings. "A girl like you should be more grateful." A girl like her. The words were never explicitly about race, but Jessica knew. She'd grown up knowing that particular tone, that specific dismissal. Richard would defend her publicly, "My wife's heritage makes our company look progressive," while privately reminding her that she was lucky he didn't care about those things. 3 years into the marriage, Jessica discovered the affairs. Not affair, singular, affairs, plural. Richard didn't even try to hide them. His secretary, the yoga instructor, the 22-year-old intern who looked at Jessica with pity during office visits. "What are you going to do?" Richard laughed when she confronted him. "Leave? With what money? Your mother's medical bills are covered by my insurance. You haven't worked in years. You have nothing that isn't mine." He was right, or so he thought. What Richard didn't know was that Jessica had never stopped learning. During those long, lonely days in the mansion, she wasn't just reading fashion magazines and planning dinner parties. She was studying, watching, planning. Every humiliation became data. Every insult, motivation. Every affair, evidence. She started small. Really small. $1,000 here and there from the household account Richard never checked, invested in cryptocurrency under her mother's maiden name. She learned the markets at night while Richard was with his mistresses. She studied his business during the day while he thought she was at the spa. "You seem happier lately," Richard noticed 6 months into her secret education. "I'm learning to appreciate what I have," Jessica replied, and he believed her because men like Richard always believe what they want to hear. The company gala was supposed to be Richard's triumph. Blackstone Industries had just closed the biggest merger in its history, acquiring 3 smaller tech companies for a sum that made headlines worldwide. Jessica wore the dress Richard selected, a black designer gown that cost more than most people's cars but made her feel like she was attending her own funeral. "Smile," Richard commanded as they entered. "And try not to embarrass me tonight. The Yamamoto family is here from Tokyo. This partnership could make us billions." The Yamamotos. Jessica's heart raced, but she kept her face neutral. Richard had no idea that Akiko Yamamoto was her former MIT roommate, or that they'd been secretly corresponding for months. The evening progressed with its usual rhythm of false compliments and subtle degradation. Richard introduced her as his little wife to investors, interrupted her conversation with the governor's wife, and made jokes about her, trying to understand the big numbers. But then, during his toast, he went too far. "I want to thank my wife," Richard announced, champagne glass raised. "Jessica proves that with enough patience and training, anyone can be elevated to this level of society." The room laughed politely. Jessica stood frozen. "She came to me with nothing, literally nothing, and now look at her. She almost passes for someone who belongs here." Almost passed. That's when he poured the champagne over her head. "A toast to transformation," he declared, and the room erupted in uncomfortable laughter while Jessica stood there, dripping, humiliated, her designer dress ruined. But Akiko Yamamoto wasn't laughing. She was recording. "I need to freshen up," Jessica said quietly, walking out with her head high while whispers followed her. In the bathroom, she didn't cry. Instead, she made a phone call. "It's time," she said simply. On the other end, her lawyer, one Richard didn't know existed, replied, "The documents are ready." "Are you sure?" Jessica looked at herself in the mirror. Champagne dripped from her hair, her makeup was ruined, but her eyes were clear for the first time in years. "I've never been more sure of anything." What Richard Blackstone didn't know could fill a library. Here's what he missed while he was building his affairs and destroying his wife's confidence. Jessica's spa days were meetings with venture capitalists. Her book club was a mastermind group of female entrepreneurs who'd been secretly funding her ideas. The online shopping he mocked her for was actually day trading that had turned her initial thousands into millions. But the real secret was Kennedy Technologies. Under her mother's maiden name, Jessica had built a company that specialized in predictive algorithms for stock trading. The MIT contacts Richard had forced her to abandon had become her silent partners. The coding skills he dismissed as cute hobbies had created software that major investment firms were desperately trying to acquire. The night of the gala, while Richard celebrated with his mistress, Jessica sat in her home office executing the plan she'd spent 3 years perfecting. First, she sold her algorithm to Yamamoto Industries for $800 million. The contract had been negotiated for months, waiting for her signal. Second, she used that capital to short Blackstone Industry stock. Jessica knew something no one else did. The merger Richard was so proud of was built on fraudulent data. She discovered it months ago in files Richard carelessly left in their shared home office. She documented everything, reported it to the SEC, and waited. Third, she bought shares in every company Richard had burned bridges with over the years. There were many. Richard's arrogance had created an army of enemies who were more than happy to work with someone bringing him down. By morning, while Richard nursed his hangover, Jessica was worth $1.3 billion. But she wasn't done. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. sharp. Richard stumbled downstairs, annoyed, expecting a delivery. Instead, he found FBI agents with a warrant. "Richard Blackstone, you're under investigation for securities fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion." As they searched his office, Richard called his lawyer, then his accountant, then his board of directors. Each call went worse than the last. His lawyer: "They have everything, Richard. Emails, recordings, financial records. Someone's been documenting your activities for years." His accountant: "Your personal assets are frozen. The authorities know about the offshore accounts." His board: "We're calling an emergency meeting. You need to step down. Effective immediately." Richard stood in his ransacked office, finally understanding. He turned to find Jessica standing in the doorway, dressed in a simple suit, looking nothing like the submissive wife he'd created in his mind. "You," he whispered. "Me," she confirmed. The emergency board meeting was held that afternoon. Richard arrived in yesterday's wrinkled suit. His accounts were frozen, his credit cards canceled. The security guard he'd tormented for years smiled while making him sign in as a visitor. The boardroom was packed. 12 board members, company lawyers, and there, at the far end of the table, sat Jessica. But not in the observer chairs where spouses usually sat. She was at the table. "What is she doing here?" Richard demanded. The board chairman, Walter Hayes, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Kennedy Blackstone now owns 43% of Blackstone Industries." The room spun. Richard grabbed the table for support. "That's impossible. The shares you used as collateral for your personal loans?" Jessica's voice was calm, professional. "The ones you borrowed against for your gambling debts in Macau? Those shares were seized and auctioned this morning. I was the highest bidder." Richard's face went from red to white. "The company bylaws state that any shareholder with over 40% ownership can call for a vote of no confidence in the CEO," Jessica continued. "I'm calling for that vote now." "You can't do this." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "I built this company." "No," Jessica stood, commanding the room's attention. "Your father built this company. You inherited it. And in the 5 years you've been CEO, you've decreased its value by 30% while cooking the books to hide your failures." She clicked a remote, and financial projections filled the screen. Real ones, not the doctored versions Richard had been presenting. "However," Jessica continued, "Kennedy Technologies has developed a revolutionary AI system that could save Blackstone Industries. I'm willing to merge my company with this one, but only under new leadership." "Your company?" Richard laughed desperately. "You mean the little project my money funded?" Jessica smiled for the first time. "Your money? Check your prenuptial agreement, Richard. The one you insisted I sign? It states that any assets I develop independently remain mine. Every dollar I invested came from my mother's life insurance policy, the one you didn't know existed because you never asked about my family beyond their use as props in your narrative." She turned to the board. "Gentlemen, ladies, you have a choice. Vote Richard out and gain access to technology that will revolutionize our industry, or keep him and watch Blackstone Industries become a cautionary tale in next year's business textbooks." The vote was unanimous. Richard wasn't just removed as CEO. The board voted to pursue criminal charges for his embezzlement. But Jessica wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she announced. "I'm also filing for divorce. My lawyer has already submitted the paperwork." Richard laughed bitterly. "Good luck getting anything. The prenup. The prenup you violated the moment you used marital assets for your affairs?" Jessica's lawyer, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. "We have receipts for every hotel room, every piece of jewelry, every dinner. Under California law, infidelity that depletes marital assets voids the agreement." The lawyer placed a folder in front of Richard. "Mrs. Kennedy Blackstone is being generous. She's not seeking alimony. She's not taking the houses, the cars, or the art collection. She only wants 2 things, her mother's medical bills covered for life and the dog." The dog. Richard had bought a golden retriever as a prop for Christmas cards, then ignored it. Jessica had been the one walking, feeding, and loving Chase every day. You can't take everything, Richard's voice broke. Jessica, please. I love you. The room went silent. Even the board members looked uncomfortable. Jessica studied the man she'd once loved, the one she'd trusted with her future. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his money and power. No, Richard. You love the idea of me. The grateful immigrant success story. The trophy wife who made you look progressive. The punching bag who made you feel powerful. But you never loved me. You don't even know me. She gathered her documents and turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Richard? My name isn't Mrs. Kennedy Blackstone. It never was. I never legally changed it. I've always been Dr. Jessica Kennedy. The girl you saved? She has 2 PhDs, speaks 4 languages, and just became the youngest female CEO in Silicon Valley. The Blackstone Industries annual gala was held in the same ballroom where Richard had humiliated Jessica. But everything else was different. The company, now Kennedy Blackstone Technologies, had doubled its value. The toxic culture Richard had cultivated was replaced with innovation and respect. The staff he'd terrorized now thrived under Jessica's leadership. Jessica stood at the podium, wearing a dress she'd chosen herself, a stunning red cheapao modernized with contemporary styling, honoring both her heritage and her future. A year ago, she began, I stood in this room covered in champagne, told I didn't belong. Tonight, I want to talk about belonging. The audience was riveted. Everyone knew the story by now. It had made international headlines. The abused wife who'd orchestrated the most stunning corporate takeover in modern history. Belonging isn't about being granted permission by those in power. It's about recognizing your own worth, even when others try to diminish it. It's about building your own table when you're not invited to theirs. In the audience, Akiko Yamamoto smiled. Their partnership had made both women billionaires. I spent years believing the narrative someone else wrote for me. That I was nothing. That I was lucky to be tolerated. That my ideas, my culture, my very existence needed to be diminished to be palatable. She paused, making eye contact with Victoria Blackstone, Richard's mother, who sat in the back row. The older woman had come to apologize, to beg for financial help. Jessica had given her enough to live comfortably, but not lavishly. It was more than she deserved but reflected who Jessica chose to be. But here's what I learned. When someone tells you you're nothing, they're revealing their own fears. They see your potential and need to diminish it because it threatens their mediocrity. The room erupted in applause. After her speech, Jessica mingled with guests, but she noticed a disturbance near the entrance. Security was dealing with someone. Richard. He looked terrible. The designer suits were gone, replaced with off-the-rack clothing. The confident swagger had become desperate shuffling. The investigation had revealed more than fraud. He owed millions to dangerous people, and without his family's protection, he was vulnerable. Please, he was begging security. I just need 5 minutes. Jessica, please. The room watched, waiting to see what she'd do. This was the man who'd tormented her, humiliated her, tried to break her. She had every right to have him thrown out. Instead, Jessica walked over. It's okay, she told security. 5 minutes. They stepped onto the balcony, the city lights below them. Jessica, Richard started. I'm not going to save you, Richard. I know. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Jessica studied him. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you lost. But you're not sorry for what you did to me. Richard's shoulders slumped. You're right. I don't even know how to be sorry for that. I don't know how to see it the way you do. And that's why you'll always be empty, Richard. You never learned that power isn't about making others feel small. It's about lifting others up. Real strength isn't about control. It's about connection. She turned to leave, then paused. Your mother is inside. I've made sure she's taken care of. Not for you. For her. Because that's what separates us, Richard. You punch down. I lift up. As she walked back to her gala, her company, her life, Richard called out one last time. Did you ever love me? Jessica stopped but didn't turn around. I loved who I thought you were. But that person never existed, did he? Inside, the party continued. Jessica found her mother, healthy and radiant, chatting with the governor. Chase, the golden retriever, wore a bow tie and wagged his tail as she approached. "You okay, my dear?" her mother asked in French. "I'm perfect, Ma," Jessica replied in the same language, the one Richard had forbidden her to speak in their home. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Jessica stood in the same spot where she'd been drenched in champagne a year ago. But this time, she raised her own glass. "To everyone who's been told they're nothing," she said to her closest allies gathered around her. "May you discover your everything." The lights of San Francisco sparkled below, and somewhere in that city, Richard Blackstone was learning what it truly meant to be nothing. Not because of his bank account, but because he'd never learned the only currency that actually mattered, treating others with dignity and respect. 2 years later, Kennedy Blackstone Technologies went public at a valuation of $50 billion. Jessica's stake made her one of the wealthiest self-made women in the world. But the money was never the point. The point was the scholarship program she founded for immigrant women in STEM. The point was the domestic abuse shelter she funded, where women could rebuild their lives and their confidence. The point was the little girl who wrote to her saying, "You showed me that being different isn't a weakness. It's power." Richard Blackstone disappeared into obscurity, last seen working at a small accounting firm in Minnesota. His mother, Victoria, became one of Jessica's most unlikely allies, using her social connections to champion women's causes she'd once dismissed. But the most important transformation was Jessica's own. She started dating again, a kind professor who loved her mind first and never once tried to dim her light. She spoke at universities, telling young women, "Never let anyone else write your story. You hold the pen." During one such speech, a young woman raised her hand. "Dr. Kennedy, what if you're currently trapped? What if you can't see a way out?" Jessica's eyes softened. "Then you do what I did. You plan. You learn. You document. You build in secret if you have to. But most importantly, you remember that their narrative about you is not your truth. You are not nothing. You are gathering strength. And when the time is right, you'll show them exactly who you've always been." The auditorium erupted in applause, but Jessica was already thinking about the young woman's question. After the speech, she found her. "Here's my card," Jessica said quietly. "Call me. Let's talk about your situation." Because that was the real revenge, not just rising above those who tried to break you, but making sure they could never break anyone else again. As Jessica's driver took her home that evening, she passed the old Blackstone building, now bearing her name, Kennedy Technologies. She didn't smile in triumph. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded and looked forward. The best revenge, she'd learned, wasn't living well. It was living authentically, fully, and lifting others as you climbed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, "Proud of you, my daughter. Dad would be too." Jessica smiled then, a real smile. Not because she'd destroyed Richard Blackstone, but because she'd finally built herself. And that was worth more than all the money in the world. Now I have to ask you, have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Have you witnessed a moment when someone who was dismissed or belittled revealed their true power? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in justice and the power of turning pain into purpose, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps us share more of these incredible stories of triumph over adversity. Remember, to everyone watching who's been told you're nothing, who's been made to feel small, who's been underestimated, you are gathering strength. Your time is coming. And when it does, the world will never be the same. Until next time, keep rising, keep fighting, and never let anyone else write your story.